Hello everyone. Today I want to talk about something that goes against one of the most deeply held assumptions in modern nutrition culture, the idea that eating less is always the path to a better metabolism and a healthier body. It is not, and the research on this is far more developed than most dietary conversations acknowledge. Under specific conditions, with specific foods, at specific times, eating more strategically, deliberately, and with an understanding of what the body does with the additional input, can meaningfully improve metabolic rate, restore hormonal function, rebuild the gut microbiome, and reverse the adaptive suppression that years of restriction have produced. This is not permission to eat without awareness. It is an invitation to understand why your body may have been metabolically defending itself against the very approach you have been using to try to improve it, and what a different approach looks like. Let me start with the biology of metabolic suppression, because this is the context that makes everything else make sense. When caloric intake is consistently below the body's energy requirements, whether through deliberate restriction, skipped meals, inadequate protein, or dietary monotony, the body interprets the deficit as a scarcity signal. It responds not by accelerating fat burning and preserving everything else, but by doing something far more comprehensive. It reduces resting metabolic rate, the rate at which energy is burned at complete rest. It decreases thyroid hormone output to slow the speed of every metabolic process. It reduces the thermic effect of physical activity, and it increases the efficiency of fat storage from whatever food does arrive. According to research, dietary restriction is independently associated with reduced gut microbiome diversity, and that diversity reduction produces downstream effects on metabolic rate, hormonal function, and inflammatory load that compound the direct metabolic suppression of the restriction itself. In one study, participants who had been chronically restricting calories showed microbiome profiles associated with lower short-chain fatty acid production, reduced butyrate availability, and measurably impaired metabolic signaling compared to those eating at or above maintenance, despite comparable body compositions. The restriction was not just suppressing metabolism directly. It was depleting the gut ecosystem that supports metabolic function from below. So what does eating more strategically actually do to reverse this? The first mechanism is the thermic effect of food. Digestion is metabolically expensive. The body burns calories, processing calories, and the magnitude of this thermic effect varies significantly by macronutrient and food type. Protein has the highest thermic effect, requiring 20 to 30% of its caloric content to digest, absorb, and metabolize. Whole food carbohydrates and dietary fats have lower thermic effects but still contribute meaningfully. Ultra-processed foods, which require minimal digestive effort, have the lowest thermic effect of all. The second mechanism is hormonal restoration, specifically the recovery of thyroid function and leptin signaling that chronic restriction suppresses. Leptin is produced by fat cells and signals to the brain that energy stores are adequate, allowing the metabolic rate to remain elevated and the reproductive and immune systems to function normally. Chronic restriction reduces leptin levels, triggering the metabolic suppression cascade. Eating at or above maintenance, particularly with adequate dietary fat and carbohydrates, restores leptin to levels that allow the brain to lift its metabolic emergency state. According to research, leptin levels respond to caloric intake within days. In one study, participants who had been in a caloric deficit and showed suppressed leptin and metabolic rate showed measurable recovery in both variables within 3 to 5 days of eating at maintenance before any meaningful change in body composition had occurred. The metabolic suppression was not structural. It was hormonal and reversible, and the reversal required eating more, not less. Thyroid hormone recovery follows a similar timeline. T3, the active form of thyroid hormone, is suppressed during caloric restriction through reduced conversion from T4, driven partly by lower gut bacterial activity and partly by elevated reverse T3 production, restoring adequate caloric intake, with sufficient iodine, selenium, zinc, and gut microbiome support, allows T3 levels to recover, increasing the metabolic rate at the cellular level in ways that no amount of continued restriction would produce. The third mechanism is gut microbiome restoration, and this is where eating more strategically means eating more diversely, not simply more of the same. According to research, increasing dietary variety, specifically the range of whole plant foods consumed, is one of the most reliable drivers of microbiome diversity recovery after a period of restriction-related depletion. Each new plant food species introduces different fermentable substrates that feed different bacterial populations. As those populations rebuild, their metabolic outputs, short-chain fatty acids, signaling molecules, gut-brain axis, neurotransmitter precursors, increase. and the cumulative metabolic support they provide to the host increases with them. The fourth mechanism is the psychological and hormonal relief of removing the restriction signal itself. Dietary restriction produces cortisol. Not dramatically, not in the way that acute stress does, but consistently. As a low-grade physiological stressor that the body maintains as long as the scarcity signal persists. That cortisol suppresses thyroid function, promotes fat storage, degrades the gut lining, and perpetuates the metabolic suppression state. When the restriction lifts when eating at maintenance is sustained long enough for the body to register that scarcity has ended, cortisol begins to normalize. And with it, the cascade of cortisol-mediated metabolic suppression begins to reverse. The body you are trying to reach is not on the other side of more restriction, it is on the other side of restoration. And restoration requires giving the body something it has been signaling through fatigue, through cold, through flat mood, through stubborn metabolic resistance that it has been missing. I hope this gave you a genuinely different framework for a conversation that has been happening in only one direction for too long. Drop a comment and tell me whether this resonates with your own experience. I read all of them. If this was useful, hit the like button and share it with someone who has been restricting for years and still not seeing results. And if you are new to NutriFlow, subscribe and hit the bell. See you in the next one.